Welcome back, everyone. It's T.A. Barron here in my writing room, and I'm delighted now to read to you the next chapter, chapter 17, from Tree Girl. The black alder bark did its part, but saving Master Melwyn took much more than that. After Anna managed to drag the old man's limp body into the cottage, her real work began. For 3 whole days she washed his wound with salt water, made poultices from pads of kelp, spooned liquids down his throat, and sang to him softly. Blood stained his straw pallet on the floor and much of the cottage besides. Finally, he opened his eyes, and when he did, those eyes nearly popped with amazement. "You came," he began, then licked his dry lips. "You came back." Anna merely nodded while she laid a fresh poultice on his skin. Then she turned him onto his side, wrapped a bandage around his ribs, and rolled him back. Eagle, seated at the edge of the pallet, gave a cluck of approval. She sang for a while, a song about skin being torn and then starting to mend, about bones as sturdy as tree trunks and bendable as saplings, and about a darkened glade in the forest, struck by a sudden shaft of light, warm and healing. The man listened, his face paler than sun-bleached bones. He placed a trembling hand on her own. "You sing pretty, child." "Hush now," she said. "You need to rest." He shook his head. "And you saved me, child. You stopped my bleeding." "No," she replied. "The alder bark did that." He caught his breath. "You used a tree?" "Aye, a tree." She faced him squarely. "And I learned how to do that from someone you called a ghoul." His whole body stiffened. "But really," she went on, "he is a tree spirit." The old man shuddered, and then he rasped, "There is something I need to say." "Not now. You're too weak," she said. She leaned over to the hearth and tossed a slab of driftwood on the coals. A splash of sparks lit the room. He waved his hand before her face. "Listen, child. You must hear this story." "What story?" "The one you've asked me to tell you before." He tried to clear his throat. It's time you finally hear just how I found you long ago in the forest." Anna's eyebrows jumped. "Tell me, please." She squatted lower as the sparrow hopped to her side. The old man turned aside. Firelight played on the back of his head. He was gazing, it seemed, not at the rough-hewn table or at the cottage wall, but at something else. Something far beyond that wall, far beyond that place and time. "Years ago, you see, I be living a long way from here, on the other side of yon ridge. I be a village smith, forging tools for just about any use. And Roanna," he looked at her for a long moment, I be a happier man. There was a woman, my wife." Anna started. "Was she—" No, listen. "There was my wife, and also our daughter, our own little girl. She be small, just a babe, but she already be a singer. And one day I could tell she'd be a dancer. For she was blessed, aye, with a dancer's spirit." He worked his tongue. Until what?" "The plague. He spat out the words, "The killing plague." It came with no warning, and it took them both. He closed his eyes for a few seconds. And so I fled. From the sickness, yes, but more so from the memory. Fled across the fields and hills, just trying to get away from there. She touched his brow, as rumpled as the bark of an old oak. A sound, part sob, part sigh, burst from his throat. She be my only child, Rowana, all I ever had. I held her tight in my arms, right till she died. But I couldn't save her, couldn't keep her tiny breath succumbing. Her eyes, like his, grew clouded. Hearth coals glowed in them like sunlight through mist. And so, he went on, I climbed yon ridge up there. 'Twas the highest place I could find. I was thinking I'd hurl myself off a cliff right then. Aye, and end everything, especially that cursed memory. His voice suddenly quieted. But there I found a tree, your precious willow, and there, resting among its roots, be a bright and smiling babe. 'Twas you, girl, and true enough, a miracle it was. Anna tried to swallow. And there be a greater miracle yet, Rowana. When I looked at your face gazing up from the ground, you looked... His words trailed off as he studied her closely. Like my own daughter, like the face in all this world I most wanted to see. Anna tilted her head. Like the face I most wanted to see. Something about those words sounded familiar, but what? So then she asked, what happened? His brow furrowed. I took you into my arms, just to hold you one more time, you see, not to... He swallowed hard. Then suddenly the willow's branches started grabbing at me, tearing at my face and my arms, like it had all come alive and angry. I saw a face, a horrid face, right there in the branches, like it'd be pulling itself right out of the very bark. He stared at her with haunted eyes. That ghoul be wanting you, child, wanting us both. But I wasn't going to lose you, not again. So I held you tight and I ran. Through that whole horrid forest I ran, trees a-clutching at me and clawing at my face and crashing down near on top of me. And I didn't stop running till I got all the way here to this very strip of sand. And here I made our home. The old man peered at her. I saved you, see, from the ghouls, and yet it didn't seem right somehow. Almost like... She leaned close. Like what? Like I was stealing somebody else's child. Somebody else's. All at once, Anna understood. Her heart vaulted in her chest. I am the Willow's child, she cried aloud, and she is my mother. The old man gazed up at her. So, he said at last, you are truly a tree spirit, she declared. Gently, she slid her fingers into her own, fingers that took the shape he so wanted to see, fingers of a human girl. Then Anna lifted her hand, seeing it truly now for the very first time. It looked as slender as a willow shoot, and it bent so easily. Her knuckles poked out like knots on a branch, and her skin so wonderfully brown with flecks of green. You will believe in me then? He asked. Anna nodded. Aye, but you will always know where I am. And sometimes, when the breeze is strong, you might still hear my songs on the wind. The next morning, Anna changed his bandage for the last time, then helped him into his chair. She kissed his brow, put Eagle on her shoulder, and stepped over to the door. Before she lifted the latch, though, she stopped. For a moment, she just gazed around the cottage, at the thatch above her head, the stones of the hearth, the straw where she'd spent so many nights, and at the old man who just sat there, just watching her go. And then she opened the door. Anna stepped outside and into the waiting arms of the trees.